Make sure your insurance doesn't come up short. Get gap cover with ALA. For more information, follow the links in the description. Hello everybody, it's been 35 years now since they ended, but I think we can now say the 80s are officially back in fashion. All of today's pop stars are either from the 80s, having a second wind, or inspired by the music of that fabulous decade. Retro gaming is a hit thing. The movies of the 1980s are being replayed in the cinema, and I for one cannot wait to get back and see Back to the Future on the big screen, having naturally missed it the first time round, on account of rather selfishly being born 4 years after it came out. Even the headlines feel somewhat familiar, with Prince Andrew and Fergie being back on the front pages, though I would say not for quite the reason they would probably like. And the world of cars is no exception, with the likes of the Lamborghini Countach and the Ferrari Testarossa continuing a battle they began over 4 decades ago. The Peugeot 205 has become a darling of the classic car world, and even the likes of the DeLorean, once upon a time a cult favourite only because of a film, is now a car close to approaching 6-figure values. Even things in their day not so well loved, like the Ferrari Mondial, are now seeing a reappraisal. Yet, there are still cars out there that for some reason just haven't had their 15 minutes of fame for the modern generation. And in there you will find this, the Citroen BX. And this is not a car you can say is a cult classic, because in its day it was a runaway success, selling over 2.3 million examples during its 12-year run. But for reasons I struggle to fathom, today when it comes to talking about cool old cars, you rarely hear it mentioned. So, why exactly is that? Is there something inherently wrong about the BX, which meant that it worked then, but doesn't now? Or has this simply aged like a fine milk? Well, find out in today's episode of JayEmm on Cars. Just to get something out of the way first, for long-term viewers of the channel, yes, I do still own a Citroen BX. For new viewers of the channel, I own a Citroen BX, specifically a BX GTI 16 valve, the hot one. It is known as Professor Tomato, and once upon a time belonged to my good buddy and fellow YouTuber Jack from Number 27. And my relationship with that car, it has to be said, is a somewhat rocky one, because I didn't actually set out to buy a BX. It's a car I was always aware of, but never particularly interested in. What I really wanted was the slightly later Peugeot 306 GTI 6. Another excellent hot hatch from the country which I think has made some of the very best, France. Once upon a time, I turned down the opportunity to buy a pretty darn good 306 GTI 6 for the princely sum of £800. A few years later, and a similar example would have set you back something like 10 grand. Me being a bloke and all, I utterly refuse to pay more for one now than I could have got it for then. But remember, just because prices are now higher, do not assume the examples for sale are better. That's why, when searching for your next car, it's a good idea to use CarVertical on all of your prospective purchases. That'll help uncover possibly hidden history in just a minute. And with my discount code JayEmm, you'll get 20% off a single search, or for the best value, get up to 50% when purchasing a pack. All you'll need is a registration or a VIN number, and with CarVertical, you can be a smarter, better, more informed car buyer. Good luck.
However, as somebody that never really was interested in hot hatches as a younger man, I always felt like it was something I really missed out on, and so I wanted to buy myself an example of a cool, old school, probably French hot hatch that I could then use and enjoy. Jack had the BX, and because they were less desirable, I managed to buy it off him. The idea was that cosmetically it did need a fair bit of work, but mechanically it was pretty good. I picked it up for just under £3,000, got it home, and then about a week later the starting issue it had turned into a running issue, and so it went off. That was about 3 years ago. I haven't seen it since, and we're still not quite done. I'm going to do a separate video on it at some point in the near future, but in brief, for the money I've spent on it, I could have bought myself that 306. However, it is a car I am very glad to say that I own, because there is something desperately cool about the BX. Even in its day, it did stand out for its looks, if nothing else. That distinctive side profile with the little spoiler on the back and the half-covered wheels at the rear. It is, I think, not quite iconic, but darn close to it. It may not have helped the BX's image. That's the only real famous example I can think of one is Helen Mirren driving it in Prime Suspect. And there the car isn't really the star. Nor is it a particularly happy-go-lucky affair, that series. So if you happen to know of a famous BX, either owned by a celebrity or that featured in media, please do hop into the comment section and tell me, because I really would like to be able to impress people a little bit more when I say, I own a Citroen BX, and they say, what's that then? What exactly is a Citroen BX? The model was launched in 1982. It was the successor to the GS and GSA, though it was technically larger, and the GSA remained on sale until around 1986. The BX first made an appearance on UK shores in 1983. It was on sale until 1993 to 1994, being replaced by the far more conventional Xantia. Underneath, this car is a close relative of the then contemporary Peugeot 405, this car being one of the earliest examples of the then merged Peugeot and Citroen. And yes, Citroen diehards will be able to point out all of the many ways in which this car was already somewhat de-Citroenified, having lost, for example, the barrel-style speedo of the old GS, though the truth is that even that car actually lost it along the way. Here instead you've got a very conventional set of dials with a speedo on the left, and in this BX16 Pilot model, a big old clock on the right, which is actually genuinely quite noisy. When the car is stationary and the engine off, it really is the only thing you can hear in it. When you're on the move, the main thing I can hear is the steering column, which is very squeaky indeed. Also has a slightly disturbing amount of play in it, but I'm told nothing to be too worried about, simply the result of lots and lots having been done to it over the years. As long as Williams haven't worked on it, I'll be fine. Helping bring Citroen into the 1980s, the BX also received a much more modern set of engines, as opposed to the air-cooled boxer ones of the GS. Here you had a range stretching from the 60 horsepower 1.1, offered chiefly in markets where that brought some sort of economical benefit, up to the 1.9 litre GTI and later GTI 16 valve, those making 160 horsepower, and in between you had things like the 1.4, a 1.6 effectively badged as a 1.5 because it made less power, and this, the 1.6, here with a carburettor, today a Weber, making something like 90 horsepower. The car also made waves with its diesel offerings, having both a 1.8 and a 1.9. Those actually were some of the biggest sellers, and for 4 years running, the BX was Britain's best-selling diesel car. And this is why today you will still actually find a number of diesel BXs on the road. They sold so many of them, a few of them had to survive. But if you thought all of that meant this was simply a 405 with a funky body on it, you'd be wrong, because there's still plenty genuinely Citroen about it, including, of course, their famous Hydropneumatic suspension system, meaning this car can go from a lowrider to Land Cruiser in just a few seconds. It also means the ride is supremely comfortable. How good is it? Well, for decades, this system was considered so good, Rolls-Royce and Bentley used it on their cars too. In fact, even today, similar things live on in unexpected places, like the McLaren 750S. The car's styling too is not simply for cosmetic purposes, it's genuinely practical, and despite the fact it is not a particularly large car, inside you have oodles of space. You've got 4 proper seats, and if you want to, you could, I suppose, squeeze a 5th person in the back too, and a very generously sized boot. Up front, we've also got electric windows with switches in, frankly, very strange places, and an electric sunroof too. From fairly early in the car's production run, power steering also became a fairly popular option, and that is just one of the reasons why Rob's partner fell in love with hers many moons ago. Previously, she'd had a Ford Escort. However, there'd been a few issues with it. So, when looking for a replacement, they cast the net rather wide and happened upon a BX. Initially, she was a little bit wary, but after just a short while living with it, she absolutely fell for it. So much so that Rob himself then decided to have one, and decades later, when searching for a classic to buy himself that he could also use day to day, she said, "Why don't you get another BX?" He went looking, and with the pickings now being disappointingly slim, he saw this, purporting to be in good condition, went up to get it, and drove it home. It has needed a few things done, but nothing major, and the car he is genuinely enjoying. And I can see why. This is one of my more demanding sections of test route, and this car takes it in its stride. But just because it's ironing out the tarmac doesn't mean you can't feel it. The steering is on the light side, but you do still get a little bit of texture, feel and feedback through it. The GTI, as you might imagine, is a little bit more stiffly set up, but even it is an utter joy on a broken piece of British tarmac. This engine too may not be particularly vocal or potent, but it works quite well. And that might be because with this car, Citroen went to town on making it as light as they possibly could. Compared with other cars of the time, this has fewer body panels, and a number of them are made from plastic, meaning that this 4-door family saloon weighs only 30 kilos more than an Alfa Romeo 4C. Yeah, 1,030 kilos for this. That is incredible, and a testament to the engineering of Citroen. Turning circle, it's actually all right. Yeah, very all right. Visibility is excellent, as is common for cars of the 1980s. All of your pillars are paper thin, and with the big old sunroof, it's a very light and airy place too. The action of the gearbox is quite nice, very little play in it for something that's now 35 years old. This car's a G-Reg, so like my own, it's a 1989-1990 car. The Pilot bit, in case you're wondering, is a dealer special. When I went to research it, I couldn't really find out much about it at all. Heel and toe in here isn't particularly easy on account of a couple of things. First off, the pedal spacing is just far too big for my driving shoes that I've got on today. I genuinely couldn't remember what the pedal box in these was like. And the brake is another classic Citroen thing. It's not the button that you get in the old DS, however, it does feel fairly similar. Because the brakes are also operated by the same system that runs the suspension, it's a very firm pedal and responds very quickly indeed. You just don't get the movement in this you'd expect with a conventional system. That is because what you're doing here isn't creating pressure, but instead operating a valve. The GTI has ABS. This one, I suspect, doesn't. They were so proud of it, in fact, on the GTI, it's got a badge on the back telling you. Drive, I probably should have mentioned, goes of course to the front wheels, but that shouldn't be a surprise. Citroen themselves having pioneered this with the traction avant in the 1930s, which incidentally is an old school car I would love to drive because I think they are impossibly cool. This whole thing really is quite a magnificent package, and for a car which would have been designed at the end of the 1970s, it simply does not feel its age. And I honestly struggle to think why exactly it is that these have effectively vanished. Now, all cars of this type, regular, ordinary stuff of the 1980s, had a fairly high attrition rate. To give you an example, my own BX GTI 16 valve, once upon a time there were 3,000 of them on the roads of Britain. Today, according to how many left, which admittedly is a slightly dubious source, there are less than 20. And I swear half of them go to Rustival every year. Much like its contemporaries, the BX also does suffer with corrosion. Despite the fact that you have plastic panels, underneath you'll still find plenty of steel. What you did have though with these are a few systems, chiefly that Hydropneumatic one, which I think always gave people cause for concern. And when you could pick these up for very, very low sums, any problems with them, I think, could produce you an issue which might cost more than the value of the car to fix. Even with my own, you could tell that whoever bought it very soon after got tired of paying half the car's purchase price every year just on keeping it running. The GTI 16 valve also had the unique problem of being an excellent donor car for the much more popular 205 GTI, which itself never received a 16 valve engine. Of course, when it comes to a turbo diesel, that's much less likely to be the case. But I think when it comes to the BX in general, it's its unashamedly 1980s styling which likely didn't do it any favours. It is probably one of those cars that aged much quicker than other things when the 1990s finally rolled around. Even when it was still on sale, it probably looked like a fairly old car. And so it would have been one of those that just didn't hold much appeal. Bought by people that wanted something that was kind of cheap and would work, and then they'd find out actually maybe it wasn't all that cheap to keep running. Happily today, there is a good network of specialists and independents out there keen to keep this and other old school Citroens on the road. The likes of Chevronics and of course my own Southways Automotive, who've been looking after my BX for the last couple of years. And I've got to say, I know it's taken a while, but that's also because Kitch has done a lot of work to the car, and I've asked him to hold fire for a few things as well along the way. The good news is that with very few exceptions, we can get basically everything, and just about nothing we found has been particularly expensive, meaning these I think would now be an ideal candidate for somebody looking for their first classic car. And really, what's not to love about it? Cool, iconic styling. Everywhere Rob goes, people talk to him about this car. They love it. I had a selection of Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Porsches, McLarens, everything you can imagine on my driveway over years and years and years. But it wasn't until I got my BX that my postie actually spoke to me about a car. And he went gooey over it. There is a real fondness for these. People love them, people adore them. It's one of these cars, I think, as soon as you put it in front of somebody, they go, oh yeah, that, how did I forget it? But sadly, people have. The good news is they're still out there, they're still available, and they are not stupidly priced. This one in good nick was picked up for £4,000. You can get projects if you're brave for a lot less, and even the GTI just doesn't seem to command that much of a premium. The diesel, if you're feeling particularly masochistic, is probably going to be the best on fuel and also a fairly durable thing. In its time, it was considered a very good engine. Just remember that time was nearly 40 years ago. But if you want to get out there in your go-go boots and listen to some Madonna again, I think there is no finer way to do it than behind the wheel of a Citroen BX. My only problem with this car, it's making me want to get mine back. Anyway, I want to say a big thank you to Rob for bringing his car out, and of course to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.